The flames could be seen before anyone understood what had happened. Just after midnight on December 7, 1991, firefighters raced toward an "I can't believe it's yogurt" shop in North Austin, Texas. To those driving by, it looked like an ordinary commercial fire. A small neighborhood business was burning. It seemed like another routine emergency. But as firefighters forced their way inside, the situation changed instantly. Behind the smoke, shattered glass, and scorched furniture lay a scene that even veteran first responders would later describe as one of the most horrific they had ever witnessed. 4 teenage girls had been murdered. The youngest was only 13 years old. The oldest was just 17. The fire, investigators would soon determine, had not caused their deaths. It had been deliberately set to destroy the evidence. The murders shocked Texas, terrified an entire generation of families, and launched one of the largest homicide investigations in the state's history. Years later, arrests were made. Confessions were obtained. Convictions followed. Then, almost as unexpectedly, those convictions were overturned. More than 3 decades later, no one has been definitively held responsible. And the question that still echoes through Austin remains the same. Who killed the girls at the yogurt shop? Austin in 1991 was growing quickly. Known for its live music, universities, and family-friendly neighborhoods, the city was often viewed as a safer alternative to many larger metropolitan areas. Residents still believed children could work evening jobs, teenagers could meet friends after school, and local businesses formed the heart of the community. The holiday season had just begun. Christmas decorations lined storefronts. Families prepared for school vacations. Restaurants and shops were busy with weekend customers. Among those businesses was a frozen yogurt store called "I Can't Believe It's Yogurt," located in a small shopping center in northwest Austin. On the evening of December 6th, 4 young girls crossed paths inside that shop. None of them knew they were living the final hours of their lives. Amy Ayers, age 13. Amy was the youngest of the 4 girls. Friends described her as energetic and cheerful. She had come to visit her older sister at work that Friday evening. She wasn't even scheduled to be there. Had she chosen to stay home, history might have unfolded differently. Next was Sarah Harbison, 15 years old. Sarah worked at the yogurt shop alongside her friend Eliza Thomas, who was 17. Both girls were employees finishing what should have been an ordinary shift. Like countless teenagers across America, they worked part-time jobs after school, spending money while preparing for adulthood. The 4th victim was Jennifer Harbison, Sarah's 17-year-old sister. Jennifer had stopped by the shop that evening to pick Sarah up after work. Instead of driving home together, the sisters became victims of one of the most infamous crimes in Texas history. As the evening drew to a close, the employees began their normal closing routine. Customers gradually disappeared. Tables were cleaned. The cash register was balanced. Outside, traffic slowed as businesses prepared to close for the night. Nothing appeared unusual. No emergency calls had been made. No reports suggested trouble inside the store. But investigators believe that sometime near closing, 1 or more offenders entered the yogurt shop. Whether they arrived as customers, waited until the doors were locked, or forced their way inside remains one of many unanswered questions. What is known is that the 4 girls never left the building alive. Shortly before midnight, nearby residents began noticing smoke. Someone reported the fire. Firefighters arrived expecting to save property. Instead, they uncovered a homicide scene unlike anything Austin had experienced. The fire had damaged portions of the building, but it had failed to destroy everything. Inside were 4 victims. Investigators would later determine that each girl had been shot. The fire appeared to have been intentionally set after the killings, suggesting the perpetrator, or perpetrators, had tried to erase evidence before fleeing. Instead, the blaze drew emergency responders directly to the scene. News spread rapidly through Austin. Parents who had once considered the city relatively safe suddenly questioned everything. Many refused to let their teenagers work evening shifts. Businesses changed closing procedures. Schools brought in grief counselors. For many residents, life became divided into 2 periods. Before the yogurt shop murders. And after them, fear quickly mixed with frustration. How could 4 girls be murdered inside a busy shopping center without anyone seeing the attackers? Why had someone set the building on fire? Was the crime targeted, or completely random? And perhaps most frightening of all, were the killers still walking free? The Austin Police Department immediately assembled an extensive investigative team. Experienced homicide detectives joined crime scene specialists, forensic analysts, and state investigators. Every inch of the building was photographed. Every surviving piece of evidence was catalogued. Investigators searched for fingerprints, footwear impressions, fibers, DNA, ballistic evidence, anything that could identify whoever had committed such a brutal crime. Yet from the very beginning, the investigation faced enormous obstacles. The intentionally set fire had damaged critical evidence. Heat and smoke complicated forensic analysis. Potential clues had either been destroyed or contaminated before investigators could recover them. Despite these challenges, detectives remained convinced someone knew more than they were saying. Tips poured into police headquarters. Some came from concerned citizens. Others came from individuals claiming to have seen suspicious vehicles or unfamiliar faces near the shopping center. Each lead required investigators to separate fact from rumor. The pressure mounted with every passing day. Austin demanded answers. The victims' families demanded justice. And detectives understood that solving the case would require patience, persistence, and evidence strong enough to withstand scrutiny in court. What they could not have known was that the investigation would span decades, involve disputed confessions, overturned convictions, evolving forensic science, and leave behind one of the most debated unsolved murder cases in American history. The investigators quickly realized they weren't dealing with a typical homicide. This was a crime scene that had been deliberately altered. The fire had scorched walls, melted plastic fixtures, and filled the small yogurt shop with smoke, but it had not succeeded in erasing everything. Beneath the damage, forensic teams began carefully documenting every surviving clue, knowing that even the smallest piece of evidence could one day identify the killer. The 4 victims had each suffered gunshot wounds. Investigators also determined that several of the girls had been sexually assaulted before they were killed. The brutality of the attack suggested more than a simple robbery. Whatever had happened inside the shop had unfolded over a terrifying period of time, leaving investigators convinced the victims had endured unimaginable fear in their final moments. Outside, the shopping center appeared strangely ordinary. Cars passed by on nearby roads. Homes only a short distance away carried on with their Friday night routines. Some residents later recalled hearing what they believed were popping sounds, but many assumed they were fireworks or a vehicle backfiring. No one realized those sounds may have been gunshots until it was far too late. By sunrise, the parking lot had transformed into one of the largest crime scenes in Austin's history. Television crews lined the streets. Yellow police tapes stretched across the storefront. Officers worked around the clock while reporters searched for answers that no one could yet provide. Behind closed doors, detectives began constructing a timeline. They interviewed employees from neighboring businesses. Customers who had visited the yogurt shop earlier that evening were tracked down. Drivers who had been in the area were asked whether they had noticed suspicious people or vehicles. Hundreds of interviews soon became thousands. Every tip, no matter how unlikely, had to be investigated. The community responded with an outpouring of support. Flowers covered the sidewalk outside the burned storefront. Vigils drew hundreds of mourners carrying candles through the December night. Parents hugged their children a little tighter. Teenagers who once worked evening shifts suddenly found themselves driven to and from work by anxious family members. The murders had changed Austin overnight. Months passed. Then years. Despite an enormous investigation, detectives still had no definitive suspect. Rumors spread across the city. Some believed the attack had been committed by local criminals. Others believed multiple offenders had worked together. There were even theories that the killers had left Texas immediately after the murders. Without enough evidence to support any single theory, investigators continued following every credible lead they received. As forensic science advanced during the 1990s, evidence collected from the crime scene was re-examined. DNA testing, still developing at the time, offered investigators hope that technology might succeed where traditional detective work had struggled. Some biological evidence recovered from the scene suggested the presence of an unknown male. But identifying that individual proved far more difficult than expected. Years later, the investigation took a dramatic turn. Police focused their attention on 4 young men from Austin. After lengthy interrogations, several of the suspects gave statements that investigators interpreted as confessions. For many watching from the outside, it seemed the mystery had finally been solved. The arrests made national headlines. Families cautiously hoped justice might finally be within reach. Prosecutors argued that the suspects had participated in the murders together and that the confessions revealed details only those involved could have known. Defense attorneys saw something entirely different. They argued the interrogations had lasted for many hours. They claimed investigators had used highly coercive techniques that produced unreliable confessions. As recordings and transcripts came under closer examination, questions began to emerge. Some statements conflicted with the physical evidence. Certain details changed from one confession to another. Other facts appeared to have been suggested by investigators during questioning rather than volunteered independently. The courtroom became the next battleground. Jurors were asked to weigh emotional testimony, forensic evidence, and disputed confessions in one of Texas's most closely watched murder trials. Several defendants were convicted. For a time, it appeared the decades-long search for justice had finally reached its conclusion. But the story was far from over. Appeals brought renewed scrutiny to every aspect of the investigation. Independent experts reviewed the forensic evidence. Legal teams challenged the reliability of the confessions. Advances in DNA analysis raised new questions about whether the convictions truly matched the physical evidence collected at the scene. Gradually, the foundation of the prosecution began to weaken. Courts determined that significant legal and evidentiary issues had affected the original proceedings. The convictions were overturned. Charges against some defendants were eventually dismissed. Others were not retried. Once again, the case returned to where it had started. Unresolved. For the families of Amy Ayres, Sarah Harbison, Jennifer Harbison, and Eliza Thomas, the reversal reopened wounds that had never fully healed. More than 3 decades after the murders, detectives continue to review evidence using modern forensic techniques. DNA remains one of the strongest hopes for identifying whoever committed the crime. Investigators have repeatedly stated that they believe someone still knows the truth. A forgotten conversation. An unexplained absence. A detail that once seemed insignificant. Any one of those could become the missing piece that finally answers the question that has haunted Austin since that December night in 1991. The passage of time has never erased the memory of what happened inside that small yogurt shop. The building itself is gone, but for many people in Austin, the location remains inseparable from the tragedy that unfolded there. Every anniversary brings renewed media attention, memorials, and the same unanswered question: who was responsible? For the victims' families, justice has never felt complete. They endured the horror of losing daughters, sisters, and friends. Then came years of waiting as investigators searched for suspects. When arrests were finally announced, many believed the nightmare was nearing its end. But as the convictions unraveled under legal scrutiny, hope gave way to uncertainty once again. The overturned convictions did not mean the murders hadn't happened. They meant the evidence presented in court was not sufficient to uphold those convictions. As a result, no one has been definitively held legally responsible for the killings. The Austin Police Department has never closed the investigation. Over the years, detectives have revisited the evidence as forensic science has improved. DNA testing has become far more sophisticated than it was in the early 1990s, allowing investigators to re-examine biological evidence that could not be fully analyzed decades ago. Officials have publicly stated that the case remains active and that they continue to pursue leads when new information emerges. Investigators have also acknowledged that memories fade, loyalties change, and people who once remained silent sometimes choose to speak after many years. Cold cases have been solved decades later because someone finally decided to come forward with a detail they had kept hidden for years. Whether that will happen in this case remains unknown. What is certain is that the murders left an unmistakable mark on Austin. Businesses strengthened security measures. Parents became more cautious about allowing teenagers to work late shifts. The case also became a subject of discussion among investigators and legal experts, raising difficult questions about eyewitness testimony, interrogation methods, the reliability of confessions, and the importance of forensic evidence in major criminal investigations. It serves as a reminder that solving a crime and proving a case beyond a reasonable doubt are not always the same thing. Today, the names Amy Ayres, Sarah Harbison, Jennifer Harbison, and Eliza Thomas continue to be remembered, not simply because of the tragedy that ended their lives, but because they were young people with futures that were stolen. They were daughters. They were sisters. They were friends. They laughed, made plans, celebrated birthdays, worried about school, and looked forward to Christmas, never knowing that an ordinary Friday night would become one of the darkest chapters in Texas history. More than 30 years later, investigators still believe the truth exists. Perhaps it lies in evidence waiting to be matched with advancing DNA technology. Perhaps it rests with someone who has carried a secret for decades. Or perhaps the final piece of the puzzle has yet to be discovered. Until that day comes, The yogurt shop murders remain one of America's most haunting unsolved homicide cases, a case that has challenged detectives, divided legal experts, and left generations searching for answers. Because in every unsolved case, there are two stories. One is the story we know. The other is the story that has never been told. Somewhere between those two stories is the truth. And until that truth is uncovered, the voices of 4 teenage girls will continue to echo through one of the most enduring mysteries in American criminal history.